Alrighty, everybody. So we are back for the second part of this lecture, where we will be taking aspects from social identity theory that we just talked about and kind of applying it to intergroup criticism. And so, specifically, what we're talking about here is something called the intergroup sensitivity effect. And so, this is a form of in-group bias that is based on criticism and looking at reactions to criticism depending on the source of that criticism. So, in other words, depending on um, who the criticizer is, and whether that criticizer is an in-group member or an out-group member. And this matters because criticism can be helpful for groups, right? So if you there's certain ways that each group could potentially improve, and sometimes you need criticism from an outside source to tell you that you need to improve in this way. But if you react badly to that criticism, you're not going to be able to use it and get the benefits from that criticism. Additionally, with intergroup relationships, bad reactions to these types of criticisms, typically when the criticizer is an outgroup member, can be harmful for intergroup relations and can, I guess, add to the competition between those groups. So, why does this effect occur? I talked about some downfalls of social categorization and social identity previously. This fits into that category. And so, one of the ways that this effect can be looked at is as a way of protecting one's social identity. Now, this isn't social identity theory isn't the only theory behind the intergroup sensitivity effect, but we will get into that more. But anyway, so criticism, especially from outgroup members, can be viewed or perceived as threatening. And again, especially threatening from those outgroup members. And as we talked about with social identity theory, the motives of outgroup members are often perceived as being worse than the motives of in-group members. And so, yeah, we'll get into that more as well. But then additionally, there is a second theory aside from social identity theory that has been used to explain this effect. And this has to do with there being social norms with how people should act and for various intergroup behaviors. And so we will talk about that as well later on. But for now, we'll be looking at this in terms of, we'll be looking at it while using a social identity theory background. So I want to take you, this is going to be less of a theoretical talk than the first one was. I'm just going to take you through some research with the intergroup sensitivity effect. Quite a bit of this has actually been done in our lab with myself and Alex and Sean McCrae. And so, yeah, I'm going to take you through the procedure and some consistent findings with the intergroup sensitivity effect. So a consistent aspect that we start off with when we're doing this research is a trivia task. And so we ask participants who is considered the most significant figure in German opera? What was the name of the London theater built by Shakespeare's company? In what city did Beethoven work as a composer? And what was decided at the Council of Constance? And the purpose of using this is hypothesizing that participants aren't going to know the answers to all these. If you do, honest, good for you. But yeah, we hypothesize that participants won't know the answers to all of these, and that will affect the criticism later on, which you will see. And so getting into how we manipulate criticism here and whether or not the criticizer is an in-group member or an out-group member, we tell participants that the criticizer was a previous participant who took that same trivia task and then made this comment. In reality, we, the researchers, make these comments, but So this is what um, a criticism would look like from an in-group member. And so here we have American participants that we use. And so we use being American as an in-group. So the criticism is, this was a fun and easy task for me, the task being that trivia task. But I wonder if other participants would do very well at it. I generally think of us Americans as being fairly uncultured. We seem much more superficial and unsophisticated compared to people from other countries. I also don't think we're as interested in other countries as we are our own culture. So that's what the criticism looks like from an in-group member, and we try to keep the criticism relatively parallel between the in-group condition and the out-group condition, just manipulating, again, who that criticizer is or supposedly is. So here, this is what the out-group condition criticism looks like. So this was a fun and easy task for me, but I wonder if American participants would do very well at it. I generally think of Americans as being fairly uncultured. They seem much more superficial and unsophisticated compared to people from other countries. I also think they're not as interested in other countries as they are about their own culture. And so basically with the criticizer's group membership is manipulated through the flag here. So you can see either in-group flag, America, or this is the Singapore flag. So after participants take that trivia task and after they read the criticism, we measure them on various things. And so there are a few self-report measures. These are on typically just Likert scales, so just rating their thoughts or feelings on a scale of 1 to 7. And so again, we ask how they perceive the criticizer's motive, so whether or not they think that the criticizer has constructive motives for making that criticism. We measure trait evaluation, so whether they think the criticizer would be likable or friendly, things of that nature. We ask whether or not they perceive the comment to be threatening. We also ask whether or not the comment made them feel angry or frustrated. And so those are the self-report measures. Additionally, we measure some behaviors here as well, or some defensive reactions in addition to just the self-report sensitivity. So that comes in the form of counter-arguing and costly punishment, which I will talk about more shortly and more in depth. So what do we find when we measure these things? So first of all, with the motives, when the criticizer is an outgroup member, perceptions of constructive motives decrease. So they perceive that the motives are less constructive when the criticizer is an outgroup member. Similarly, the outgroup criticizers are given worse trait evaluations, so they're rated as less friendly, less likable, things like that. When the criticizer is an outgroup member, we see that threat increases, or that self-report perceived threat increases relative to when the criticizer is an in-group member. And finally, same thing with anger. Anger is self-reported to increase when the criticizer is an outgroup member. So with all of these various measures, we see a consistent source effect there where the outgroup criticizer is rated worse. Additionally, just something I want to add here is that motives has consistently been found as what is called in statistical terms a mediator for threat. So in other words, there's this relationship between condition and threat, where outgroup criticizers are rated as more threatening, but we see that that's consistently due to the motives for the outgroup criticizer being rated worse. So in other words, if there is an outgroup criticizer who a participant perceived as having pretty constructive motives, we wouldn't expect that participant to rate threat very highly. Getting into those defensiveness measures. So first, counter-arguing here. With this task, we give participants 5 minutes total, and they have a choice to make. So they can either spend their 5 minutes responding to the comment or to the criticism, or they can do a different task, which has been changed throughout this research. But previously, they've had an option of watching a funny movie or doing anagrams, which is just unscrambling words for a reward, or things like that. And then we measure how much time they spent on each of these things, or how much of the 5 minutes was allotted to responding to that comment, as well as how many, maybe how many anagrams were completed. And so with this, we find that participants will spend consistently more time responding to the comment or the criticism when the criticizer is an outgroup member, as opposed to doing, watching that funny movie or trying to get a reward through anagrams and things like that. Secondly, so participants have been found to be more likely to punish outgroup criticizers. And so we use a costly punishment task here. So what this just broadly means is that participants have the option of punishing the criticizer, but that comes at a cost to themselves. So that'll make sense as I explain this, I hope. But we give them the option to award the criticizer, who again we say is a previous participant. So they have the opportunity to award that criticizer a bonus. And so this is what that looks like. We say, excellent comment that deserves the full bonus will be 12 cents on the scale of 0 to 12 versus a completely unacceptable comment will lead to 0 cent bonus. And so we tell participants that, first of all, for just doing this task at all, we're going to give them 5 cents. And then additionally, we will give them half of whatever they decide to give the outgroup criticizer, or the criticizer. So if they decide to give that criticizer 12 cents, they themselves will receive 6 cents plus that initial 5. So that's why this is costly punishment, because if they choose to give the criticizer 0 cents, that is literally costly to themselves. And we find that people will punish the outgroup criticizers more, so they give more monetary reward to those in-group criticizers than the outgroup criticizers. Interestingly, and kind of a more recent line of research is something called the bystander intergroup sensitivity effect. And so this is where we're going to start to get away from social identity theory a little bit, because we see that third-party bystanders also exhibit the intergroup sensitivity effect. So what this looks like is participants, we'll stick with the Americans and Singapore manipulation. So participants are American, and they will see criticism or read those critical comments that are either maybe someone from Singapore criticizing someone else from Singapore. So that's intra-group criticism, or they could see someone from Singapore criticizing someone from, South Africa or something, and that would be intergroup criticism. But the participants themselves are third-party bystanders to this criticism, so they're not a part of either of the groups in the criticism, and we check for that beforehand. Interestingly, we find, and research done in our own lab has found that this effect is larger than the classic intergroup sensitivity effect, where participants are a part of the in-group. So with this bystander effect, participants will rate that intergroup criticism much more harshly in terms of, again, those same measures: motives, commentary evaluation, threat, anger, and those defensiveness measures. They will rate the criticism from outgroup criticizers more harshly than that same criticism from in-group criticizers or the intra-group criticism. And so again, you have to kind of start to question why this happens, because social identity theory doesn't really make sense here, because being a third-party bystander, right, your social identity isn't really threatened from this criticism because you're not a part of either of those groups. And so this is where the social norms theory comes in, where there are certain norms that we have in society for intergroup behavior. So things that are allowed, things that are okay, and things that are perceived as not okay. And so with this theory, specific for the ISE, one of those norms is that when you criticize someone else or another group, your motive should be good. You should have constructive motives for doing this. And what happens is that group membership is used as a heuristic. So when the criticizer is an outgroup member, that's used as a heuristic that the motives behind that criticism from the outgroup criticizer are bad. The motives are not constructive. And so that is the overall theory behind the bystander ISE. Let's talk a little bit about decreasing the ISE. And so again, as I talked about earlier, this is important because groups need this criticism to adapt and to improve. And they're not able to use this criticism properly when they're reacting to it with sensitivity and defensiveness. And additionally, trying to get at improving those intergroup relations so that these, in-groups and out-groups can get along better and to some extent help each other. So how can we decrease this effect? There are a couple of key strategies that have been tried. And so some of these strategies are from the criticism source. So trying to improve how the criticizer criticizes to help decrease this effect. And then additionally, and more recently, research that we've worked on in our own lab that I'll talk about gets at influencing how the target of that criticism receives it. And so I'm just going to broadly cover a few of these strategies here. So this is from, again, the source of that criticism, the person making the criticizer. And so the goal behind these strategies is to improve motive perceptions of that outgroup criticizer. And a few strategies have been tried that really didn't work. So spotlighting, this is just when the criticizer says that this criticism is only aimed at a specific portion of the group that they are criticizing. So that has been found to not work. And additionally, and interestingly, experience doesn't work as well. So even if the outgroup criticizer has experience with the in-group or experience with the group that they are criticizing, this does not help decrease or eliminate the intergroup sensitivity effect. However, some framing strategies have worked, and by framing, I just mean changing the way that critical comment is worded. And so it's been found that using we language helps a lot in decreasing the intergroup sensitivity effect. So when I showed you the criticism from an outgroup member previously, the whole comment was, they are uncultured, they do this, but changing that comment to, for outgroup members, say we, it kind of gets at creating a common in-group there. And so the outgroup criticizer isn't perceived quite as much as an outgroup member, and therefore the perceptions of motives are improved and the ISE is decreased. Additionally, it's been found that praise decreases sensitivity to criticism overall. And so what I mean by this is it doesn't exactly decrease the ISE, but it decreases sensitivity to criticism when the criticizer is both an in-group member and an out-group member. So while it doesn't directly decrease this effect, it still definitely has benefits. And then lastly, sharing has been found to be successful. And so sharing is just, for a broad example here, if I was a criticizer, I could say, University of Wyoming is blah, 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 this and this. Oh, but my group also struggles with these things, or my group struggles with this. And so it's just kind of making your own group, I guess, more vulnerable. And that gets at improving those outgroup criticizer perceptions of the outgroup criticizer motives. Now, so changing to trying to manipulate how the target of the criticism perceives the criticism. So this is a more recent branch of research. There's not much at all, honestly, on this. But a research study that we ran in our own lab was trying to use reappraisal. So literally changing, trying to change the way that the receiver of the criticism perceives that comment. And so we had participants look at the comment from an objective um, and detached manner. That second objective is supposed to be there, but yeah, so we had them look at it from supposed to be a neutral, detached, and objective manner. And so what we found with this was that having participants reappraised in this way did lead to decreased threat from that criticism and decreased feelings of anger as well. And it also led to marginally an improved evaluation of that outgroup criticizer. However, we didn't find that this strategy improved perceptions of the commenter motives. And additionally, we've yet to find evidence that reappraisal can decrease those defensive reactions. So not just the self-report ratings. So that kind of gets into what we want to be doing, what we want to be looking for in the future. And so first of all, some future directions are, again, figuring out more ways to decrease the ISE from the point of view of the target. So changing the ways in which you're trying to decrease feelings of sensitivity and actions of defensiveness in those targets. And so looking to potentially use maybe different types of reappraisal or other emotion regulation strategies that have not quite been used to get at that. However, at least with the first attempt with reappraisal, it didn't get at those motives or at the improving perceptions of those motives for outgroup criticizers, which is important because again, motives appears to be a mediator and a very important variable in this effect. So just trying to come up with strategies for how perceptions of those outgroup criticizer motives might be improved. Additionally, again, this kind of newer branch of research-ish with the bystander ISE, running more studies that compare both the bystander ISE and that classic ISE in the same study to see, how much weight each of these theories has in terms of explanatory power, and whether this effect is better explained by social identity theory or whether it's better explained by having those kind of intergroup and societal norms in there. And so then again, once we have a better idea of this, getting back to decreasing the effect is how can outgroup criticizers get around this? What can outgroup criticizers do to not be rated more harshly by third-party group members? So to wrap up here and summarize,